Hello and welcome everybody to Intelligent Interviewer Series. This session we're going to talk about strategies for answering questions and staying on pace during an interview. My name is Heather Rickrell. I'm a career counselor at the University of Wisconsin-Superior, and I also serve as the Assistant Director of Career Services. This particular session is part of the Spring 2021 Prepare for the Fair series. So, we are going to cover today the topics of the types of questions you might encounter in an interview. And along with those types of questions, we'll talk about strategies for answering the major types of questions. And then at the very end, we'll talk about tips for staying on pace so that you don't ramble during your interview. So, the types of interview questions, there's a bunch of different types, but these are the types that you are really most likely to run into. So, common and introductory, behavioral, scenario based, unexpected, negative, and illegal. We'll go through them one by one. So, the first one is the common or introductory type of question. These are questions like you see listed here. They're really like introductory, like get to know you. Um, they are things like tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume. That's actually the same question. Um, they might ask you, what do you know about the company? Why are you interested in the position? What skills and such do you have that make you a good fit? Those sorts of things. The strategy for these sorts of questions is to really think about how you'll answer these well ahead of time so you're not caught off guard. So that means you need to try to look up question banks and see what kinds of things you might encounter. Use specific examples whenever you can. Um, the first 2 points here will help you make sure you're not rambling. So if you're practicing, so you're trying to answer ahead of time and you're using examples, that will help you answer those common or introductory questions. The next type of question is behavioral questions. They ask you for specific examples about your past experiences. These are questions that always begin with something like, tell me about a time when, describe a situation in which, or any combination of those, tell me about a situation in which, and so forth. And the strategy for answering these questions well is really specific, and it's called the STAR plus learning strategy. So I've laid that out for you here. Think of S as the situation, or think of it as setting the scene. What was going on? The task for T is, what was your goal? What did you need to accomplish, or were you trying to accomplish? What direction were you given, perhaps? A stands for action. What action or actions did you take? What decisions did you make? It might be, who did you need to talk to? What questions did you need to ask? What reports did you need to run? Those sorts of things. The R stands for result or resolution. So, how did everything turn out? What happened in the end? And finally, the learning piece of this, what did you learn in this situation that you just told them about that you can apply the next time something like this comes up? Or what would you change if you had to do this again? Or how did this experience change your perspective? So, anytime you can do that for a behavioral question, it really gives you a nice full circle answer without having to ramble too much. So, a pro tip that I have for you on behavioral questions is search behavioral interview tips from the interview guys. You'll get a good video there, and that's going to give you a lot of good examples. Situational and scenario based questions. So these questions are ones where you'll be given a scenario, and the interviewer will ask you how you would work through them. So they're really looking for, just as bullet number 2 here says, how you think things through, how you make decisions, how you're going to interact and communicate, how you solve problems, how you take into consideration ethics, professionalism, and those sorts of things. So they're questions like, you encounter a customer who is unhappy with his or her purchase. How would you approach this situation? What would you do if you were asked to perform a task you've never done before? Let's say that you're in teacher ed and you're going for your first teaching job. They might ask you, um, give you the scenario, you receive an angry email from a parent. Um, they're asking to meet with you and the principal. How are you going to handle this? The best way to answer this question is again to use that star plus learning strategy and try to use a past example if you have one that you think illustrates how you would handle the situation. So again, this what's written at the bottom here. The strategy is the same as in the last slide, but I have a text, an example here on the next page of a scenario based answer using an example from a past experience. So the situation, the task here was role as a marketing coordinator. Manager asked me to build and launch a digital ad campaign, something I'd never done before. I explained to her I had no experience leading the project. Happy to take it on if I could have some guidance. The action along with that is to met with several employees who had experience running digital ads, studied up on best practices, launched the campaign. The result that the hands-on learning experience allowed me to become a team expert on digital advertising. You know, the learning, you could say something like, I would use this same strategy again because it was effective. It helped me learn a new skill and it allowed me to complete the task at hand. Um, if you don't have a past example, still use the STAR strategy, and you're probably going to need to say things like, I probably would do this, or something like that language instead of in the past I did that. So they're very similar, the scenario based and the behavioral based. You want to make sure you're using that star plus learning strategy again so that you don't ramble or sort of get lost in the story. It's really built to keep you on track. Unexpected questions. In my mind, these are some of the worst ones because they just catch you off guard. They really are kind of designed to see, can they get you flustered, can they make you more nervous, trying to see like, can you handle something unexpected, and that's an indicator of how well you think on your feet. They might be looking to gain insight into how creative you are, if you use humor, if you think of others, those sorts of things. And they're questions like, and I've been asked these questions in an interview before, so I know they happen. If you were granted 3 wishes, what would they be? If you could be a superhero, what would that superpower be and why that one? If you wrote a book about your life, what would be the title of that book? Tough questions, right? So here's the strategy that I found that works. Take a deep breath and then take a few seconds of silence while you think about your answer. If you start talking right away, you will probably stumble and bumble and not sound as confident. Okay, so that's why that second bullet is there about delivering the answer confidently. So this is kind of how it might sound. If you were granted 3 wishes, what would they be? Take a breath. I think my first wish would be, so on. My second wish would be, and so on. So the last bullet here in the very bottom of the page, quickly, succinctly, without rambling, explain your answers or choices, and it helps them understand where you're coming from with your answer. Okay, you don't want to just leave them hanging and not fill that out for them, because remember, when you answer questions, you are painting a picture for them of how you communicate and how you interact. Negative questions. Negative questions can really be in any category. But for me, the things that pop into mind immediately are questions like, "What are your weaknesses?" or "Tell me about a time you made a mistake and how you navigated the situation." Notice the signifier here. Tell me about a time, right? That says to you, this is a question that is a behavioral question. So I need to use the star plus learning, right? And a specific example. But in questions like, what are your weaknesses? I think the best thing for you to do is to think about how you'll answer these questions well ahead of time so you're not caught off guard. particularly important with this question about weaknesses. Again, you use those specific examples whenever you can. Use star plus learning wherever you can. The critical piece, though, is you have to be honest. Emphasize what you've learned or implemented to turn it into a positive as best you can. Here's the other piece: don't apologize. Everybody has a learning curve, okay? Don't apologize. Be honest. The next thing, the strengths and weaknesses question. So, this is a pretty common question that will come up. And so, I laid out how you might answer both sides of that, right? So, these are the strengths on the left side. State the strengths, talk about how you've used it to achieve success. This adds context for the employer. Tell them how you can see yourself using that strength in the job or in the organization to help them be successful. For weaknesses, you're going to state that weakness, how you know about it or found out you have it. Talk about what you're doing to address the weakness. What have you learned about yourself from working to improve? And you want to make sure that you show the employer you can take that feedback or criticism, that you can improve it, and that you can learn from it. The little pop-up text box over here on the right hand side just says, note, especially on this weakness side, this is a modified version of the star plus learning strategy, and actually so is the strength, right? So here's your situation, here's your task and your action, here's your result and your learning. Okay, so I can give you an example of the weaknesses question here, if in case that's helpful. So if you're asked what your weaknesses are, for me, I have trouble prioritizing, and I know I have that weakness because I feel it. I like viscerally feel it, and I know I feel it when I start feeling overwhelmed. So I know that's why it happens. And so what I do to overcome that weakness is I will ask my supervisor, can you help me lay this out and help me understand what the priorities are? What do you see as most important from your viewpoint? And I also tell my supervisor, if I ask you this, I'm feeling overwhelmed and I just need some perspective. That's all it is. So, what I've learned about myself from working on this weakness is that I gain a clearer perspective of my priorities and what they should be, and I carry that forward. So, I find myself asking that question less and less. Um, and that's sort of the way that you would go about it. Again, taking that feedback or that criticism, I didn't really say that. It wasn't quite appropriate for this one, but finding ways to improve on the weakness and learning from it. A lot of students will talk about coming into college not feeling or being very organized or managing time well. They will mention, that they had maybe bad grades at midterm or something like that, or they missed some work shifts or something like that, so that's how they learned about it. And then they will talk about what they tried, things they put in place. Maybe it's a Google calendar, a phone calendar, their Outlook calendar. Maybe it's a paper planner or something like that. And how now they don't miss things, they don't miss deadlines, they manage their time well, and they use it to really really shine. So almost so that it becomes somewhat of a strength. And that's, again, taking that negative kind of question and turning it towards the positive. So illegal questions are something that happen more frequently than we would like to believe. And here's what happens: there are certain topics surrounding identity that recruiters are not allowed to ask in interviews in the United States. So please note, and I'm going to directly read these. A competent, well trained recruiter will not ask you an illegal question, but illegal interview questions are asked more often than you think. They should be a major red flag to you as a candidate. So you need to ask yourself, do I want to work at a place where people may not be as trained as they should be? Um, A recruiter can't ask you about age, citizenship status, marriage or relationship status, if you have kids or are pregnant. I see a typo there. Race, religion, sexual orientation, etc. Those are protected classes. In some states, state law prohibits recruiters from asking you about your past salary in any form. They can't ask it as an interview question, and they can't ask it on on an application. So you would need to look that up and know that. It's a simple search engine question. What they can ask, this one is okay, is are you legally eligible or authorized to work in the United States? That one is fair game, both verbally and written out on an application form. So legal questions might look and sound like, are you married? How many kids do you have? Do you go to church, or what church do you go to? Are you a US citizen? How old are you? Um, a strategy for answering illegal interview questions. It's a three-step process. The first one is you want to determine why the interviewer is asking the question. Does he or she have a legitimate concern? The second part of this is you want to tailor your answer to speak to that concern, but gracefully avoid the illegal part of the question. And then the third piece of it is you want to turn that conversation back to your job related strengths. So here's an example. Are you married or do you have kids? And I may answer, if you're trying to learn or let's see, let me start that over. I pride myself on my flexibility, being available to work a flexible schedule, evenings, weekends as needed. I just need a little bit of um, notice ahead of time, and I can usually make anything work. I have worked a very flexible schedule in the past, and I'm happy to do that again with the success of the company, the team, whatever it happens to be, in mind. So there we are, back to job related strength of flexibility. You might even say I'm happy to give more examples of times when I've been flexible in the workplace. Um, if you say to the employer, you can't ask me that question, or that's an illegal question, it might stop the interview at that point in time. They might be offended, they might be defensive, um, but it needs to be a red flag, and then you've got to try to figure out how to answer that question. So keep in mind with these illegal interview questions that essentially you're trying to get to the intent of the question, but it really takes practice to quickly determine what that intent is. So I've got articles and videos listed on the next couple of slides. There's another typo. They have examples and will be the most helpful. So let me show you those. There are 4 videos in particular. None of them are very long, that cover handling illegal interview questions. So the first 2 are from colleges, and they are coaching students through questions. And lawyers.com and Serious Personnel Video talk about illegal interview questions in general, and they do give some examples. And then there are some articles that I recommend. The Muse, which is aimed towards college students, how to handle five illegal questions and how to dodge them. There's a top resume article, guide for handling inappropriate interview questions, and then the Yale, Yale Office of Career Strategy talks about legal versus illegal um, questions. So all of these are really great resources for examples. So the last thing we need to talk about today, now that we know what the question types are and some strategies for handling them, is why pacing is important, and then strategies to aid us with pacing during an interview. And by pacing, I don't mean like walking back and forth. It's a little bit different. Pacing is really all about time management, but it's critical. You want to make sure in your interview that you give thoughtful, complete answers, but also that you ensure that the interviewer can get to all the questions they have for you. So, what pacing does, what this concept does, is it really keeps you from rambling, and it also makes sure that you give full answers so you can represent yourself the best you possibly can. One thing to keep in mind is you might need to ask how many questions they have for you. Now, they may not answer that, and that's okay, but at least you tried, right? Given what you know about how long the time frame of the interview is, you might have to do some quick math. And here's it. Don't be afraid, but here's what that might look like. Let's say there are 10 questions, and you know that you've got 60 minutes for this interview. They'll probably have some intro stuff and a short wrap up. There's 5 minutes gone. They probably need time to ask the questions. That might be 5 to 7 minutes of the time gone. So now we're up to 10 to 12 minutes gone here. They're likely to ask what questions you have for them. You should take that opportunity to ask questions. That's another probably 10 minutes gone. So now we're up to, like 22 minutes for 10 questions, right? At this point, you're probably looking at 1.5 to 2 minutes per answer. And this is very, very doable if you put the strategies into play. And I would say typically 1.5 to 2 minutes is about where you should be no matter what. Beyond that, unless you're talking about something really complex, it just gets to be it's too much rambling, and it's hard for the people listening to your answer to sort of stay on track. So that pocket of 1.5 to 2 minutes is a great place to be. Some strategies to aid you with pacing. We talked about it in the last session of Intelligent Interviewer, but I can't stress enough how important it is to practice. Practice, practice, practice as many times as you can. You can use Standout. You can find that on our campus logins page. It is a online video mock interview practice platform. So you can set up your own questions. It will record you. It gives you a time slot in which to complete answering your question. It cuts you off if you don't stay within that time slot. It records all of your answers, and when it's done, you get a readout of their artificial intelligence of what it thinks you said. And then you can share that with career services folks to get some feedback, or you can just sort of review it on your own too. The other piece about practicing is you could use a search engine to look up general interview questions as well as career field or position specific questions. So, for instance, let's say that you want to go into law enforcement, you could look up, police officer interview questions or something like that. Same thing works for graduate school, by the way. So if you look up dental school um, admission interview questions, they will come up. If you use the strategies listed with the question types that we just went over, they're all designed to give you succinct, so short, um, concise, complete answers. They are built with pacing in mind. They're built to keep you on track. So if you can put those strategies into action, and again, that's going to take practice, you will be just fine. And that is it for the session of Intelligent Interviewer. Next week's Intelligent Interviewer series session will cover tips on interviewing over the phone and in a virtual environment. So I want to thank everybody for coming today.